It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
Welcome, everybody. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to the cleverly titled The Phil Ferguson Show. I hope you're all doing well, having the time of my life. And if I steal Dave Ramsey's little line, I'm doing better than I deserve. That's probably true, actually. But got a great show today. We are going to talk to Ray Smock, who is the single largest, number one most requested guest for me to have back. I try to go a full year between guest appearances, but sometimes people say, oh, I like that person or I like this person. And Ray Smock is the most requested. So here it is, folks. You've been asking, and I will deliver. We have an interview with Ray Smock later in the show. The Investing Skeptically segment, whatever, for today, it's kind of a twofer. It's about ESG funds, and it's also about biblically based funds. So we're going to have some fun with that. And that stuff is so long and beautiful and full of information. I'm keeping the intro short, and we're going to go right into our break, and then you'll hear about these mutual funds from questions from fans of the show, and then the interview with Ray Smock. So don't go anywhere.
People come up here and they thank Jesus for this award. I want you to know that no one had less to do with this award than Jesus. He didn't help me a bit. If it was up to him, Caesar Milan would be up here with that damn dog. So all I can say is, suck it, Jesus. This award is my God now.
You're listening to the Phil Ferguson Show.
I've got a couple of listener questions that I want to kind of put together and discuss today. One was specifically about ESG funds, and the other one was about a specific mutual fund or fund family that we're going to talk about. That's the Timothy funds. But before we get into that, the ESG that has come up, and it's a very trendy thing. And often I'll watch podcasts, we'll listen to podcasts, watch YouTube videos, or informational videos from large brokerage firms that I have signed up for just to kind of get a feel for it. And of course, they'll say things like the new investments for ESG is 125% more than last year. Okay. That just means it's effective as a marketing tool. And I think that the whole thing is a fucking marketing gimmick. If you want to learn more about it, I have done at least 3 proper show segments on it. The first one is show number 120, and that was in May of 15. Wow, that's 7 years ago? Oh my God. A little bit more recent, show number 301 on social investing. The first 2 are social investing, socially conscious. Maybe that's why they don't use that anymore. Socially responsible. And of course, at some point in the past, that became ESG. It's the same idea, but now they call it ESG, and that's for environmental, social, and governance. And all of it is a marketing gimmick. If you want to know more, go back and listen to those old shows. 120, 301, 336. That's the most recent one that I could find in my really sad and pathetic notes from April of 2020. So that gives you the idea. But in short, don't use an ESG. Don't use any kind of specialized, marketed, targeted fund kind of thing, because it's just a gimmick. It's a gimmick to get your money. And right now it's a really freaking trendy gimmick. And a lot of people are putting money in it. Don't. And that brings me to this other fund or fund family that someone brought to my attention called the Timothy plan or Timothy funds, and they are investing with biblical principles. Biblical principles. Does that mean you can sleep with your daughter's principles, or that you have to kill your parents and follow Jesus' principles? I don't know which biblical principles they're using. I'm sure I could read, but I don't give a fuck. Oh, wait, here they are. Liberty, marriage, family, purity, life/abortion, stewardship, which includes gambling, longevity, tobacco, and sobriety, alcohol. So are they supporting tobacco? That's weird, because I'm sure they're supporting purity. They're not supporting tobacco. Tobacco is the category they avoid. Oh, because in purity, they avoid pornography. So these are the things that are doing. And so when I looked at this fund, and like I said, the fund that I'm looking at is TLGAX, and you can go to morningstar.com yourself and look it up, TLGAX. This fund, let's see, performance numbers here. Oh, it's always never fast enough. 10%, 10.2% per year, but the equivalent category is the Vanguard Large Cap Growth Index Fund, and its performance over the last 10 years has been about 14.5%. So you're getting 4% less per year by using a Timothy fund than a highly efficient Vanguard Index Fund. So you're losing 4% of your money. If you really wanted to help out, and hopefully you do, but I always tell people, if this is a kind of fund that appeals to you, don't buy it. Just get a regular index fund and then skim off 1 or 2% that you give away each year. And that way you can see where the money goes, you can control where the money goes, and you can know that it's going to something practical. Now, one of the things that I've heard often in the past, not with either one of the people I just talked to about these two topics, but okay, yeah, sure, it underperformed by 4%, but it's only 4%. Only 4%. Only. So I thought, okay, just a real quick number analysis like I like to do. You're going to start with $100,000, and I'm going to compare the stock market average return of 10%, give or take, and the Timothy Fund's return, which is 4% less. So it's not 96% of the 10%. It goes from 10% to 6%. It's 4 percentage points less, 400 basis points, they might say in the biz. And so you invest $100,000 in each one of these two choices. In 10 years, the index fund would have about $259,000, and the Timothy fund might have $179,000. So you lost $80,000. That's a pretty big deal. If you waited for 30 years, maybe you're young, you get 30 years, or you're going to give the money to your kids or a charity. The difference between the Vanguard Index Fund is $1.75 million, and the Timothy Fund is $574,000. So a loss of almost $1.2 million. That's the cost that you're paying when you lose 4% per year. $1.2 million. That was not without adding any money. And then, of course, it assumed that you started with $100,000 and you only had those two funds to compare. But the differences over time are huge. This is why we want to avoid cost where possible. This is why we want to avoid taxes where possible, and have money even grow in a tax privileged account, tax qualified, or qualified for special tax treatment. It's a qualified account, and you'll eventually pay the taxes, but you get the compounding growth over the long run. So ESG, socially conscious, socially responsible investing, all of it, according to me, it's a gimmick. It's a marketing gimmick to separate you from your money. You could invest in something like the Timothy Fund, $100,000, and end up with $574,000 30 years later, and feel good about it the whole time if you're religious and you believe in that stuff. But if instead you went to the index fund, you would have 1.75 million, or about 100 or 1.2, 1.17, 1.2 million dollars more money. So this is why anything that's not an index fund would have to convince me it's worth doing something different. So that's a default starting point. the research, the data, the history all says index fund, index fund, index fund. Don't fuck around with anything else. Don't get an ESG fund. And also, same thing with the Timothy Fund, with the ESG funds, you're actually not doing anything beneficial to anybody at all, except for the mutual fund company that sells that shit to you. So, quick little segment on ESG and biblically based investing. The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Investments should be based on your personal situation, and you, of course, should consult with your financial advisor or tax professional before taking any actions.
Reverend Mesa, Reverend Rock, I'm grateful for your generous invitation to state my views. While the so-called religious issue is necessarily and properly the chief topic here tonight, I want to emphasize from the outset that I believe that we have far more critical issues in the 1960 campaign. The spread of communist influence until it now festers only 90 miles from the coast of Florida, the humiliating treatment of our president and vice president by those who no longer respect our power, the hungry children I saw in West Virginia, the old people who cannot pay their doctor's bills, the families forced to give up their farms, an America with too many slums, with too few schools, and too late to the moon and outer space. These are the real issues which should decide this campaign. And they are not religious issues. For war and hunger and ignorance and despair, no religious barrier. But because I am a Catholic, and no Catholic has ever been elected president, the real issues in this campaign have been obscured, perhaps deliberately, in some quarters less responsible than this. So it is apparently necessary for me to state once again, not what kind of church I believe in, for that should be important only to me, but what kind of America I believe in. I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no Catholic prelate would tell the president, should he be Catholic, how to act, and no Protestant minister would tell his parishioners for whom to vote, where no church or church school is granted any public funds or political preference, and where no man is denied public office merely because his religion differs from the president who might appoint him or the people who might elect him. I believe in an America that is officially neither Catholic, Protestant, nor Jewish, where no public official either requests or accepts instructions on public policy from the Pope, the National Council of Churches, or any other ecclesiastical source, where no religious body seeks to impose its will, directly or indirectly, upon the general populace or the public acts of its officials, and where religious liberty is so indivisible that an act against one church is treated as an act against all. For while this year it may be a Catholic against whom the finger of suspicion is pointed, in other years it has been, and may someday be again, a Jew, or a Quaker, or a Unitarian, or a Baptist. It was Virginia's harassment of Baptist preachers, for example, that led to Jefferson's Statute of Religious Freedom. Today I may be the victim, but tomorrow it may be you, until the whole fabric of our harmonious society is ripped apart at a time of great national peril. Finally, I believe in an America where religious intolerance will someday end, where all men and all churches are treated as equals, where every man has the same right to attend or not to attend the church of his choice, where there is no Catholic vote, no anti-Catholic vote, no block voting of any kind, and where Catholics, Protestants, and Jews, at both the lay and the pastoral levels, will refrain from those attitudes of disdain and division which have so often marred their works in the past, and promote instead the American ideal of brotherhood. That is the kind of America in which I believe.
Hey, poor! You don't have to be poor anymore! Jesus is here!
Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you're doing fantastic. I have today the most requested return guest, or I guess the most requests that this guest returns to the show. So I am absolutely delighted to make the listeners happy. Today with me is Ray Smock. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing fine.
And just real quick here, and you'll help me out with some of the words here. I just want to mention some of the things that you've done. You were involved with a collection, a historical review of the works of Booker T. Washington. Am I kind of phrasing that correctly?
Yeah, that was in an earlier phase of my career when I was the co-editor of the 14-volume Booker T. Washington papers. He was the first African-American to be given the same treatment that we do with founding fathers, these multi-volume studies. And that was many years ago. And then more recently, I wrote a biography of Booker T. Washington.
Okay.
And so that, yeah, and that was in an earlier phase of my life before I became a political historian and the historian of the U.S. House of Representatives.
And I was going to mention that you were the official historian for the House of Representatives for 12 years.
Right.
And so you studied and collected all of the information, all of the history that you could as a reference, in case anyone in the House of Representatives wanted historical information, they would come to you for that, right?
Yes.
That absolutely fantastic. Recently, of course, you have written 3 books on your and my favorite president ever, Donald J. Trump.
Yes. Well, that's how I kept saying during Trump's administration. I started keeping writing essays. Some of them were posted on Facebook and other social media. A few of them ended up as op-eds in newspapers, but mostly I was just writing for myself on a regular basis, trying to figure out all the crazy things that were going on every day, and also to put them in some historical context. And to try to figure out how he fit in with other presidents and the way presidents are supposed to act. So it helped me, and I think it helped some of my readers to try to figure out on a day-to-day basis how crazy he really was. And now we're finding it out.
And if anyone wants to see more of this stuff, of course, you can buy Ray's books, or you can go find them on Facebook, Ray Smock. And see stuff there. Another thing, we talked about this. You have been the director for the Robert C. Byrd Museum.
Center for Congressional History and Education. Yes.
There we go. There's a long name. For 12 years, again, still working in that historic role, the role of preserving history and maintaining history and keeping history. And of course, one time you were kind enough to give me a tour of the archives and just the amazing amount of stuff that's collected there. And what university is that part of?
It's at Shepherd University in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, which sounds a long way from Washington, D.C., but it isn't. It's only 75 miles. My office, I can walk down to the Potomac River, the same one that flows through D.C. So we are close enough to D.C. that we can get down to the National Archives, the Library of Congress, and places like that. And, but we have a nice facility out here. In fact, we get some members of Congress have used it for retreats, and we also have a lot of federal historians and different agencies that come out here and hold their annual meetings because they want to get outside of D.C. And it's a lovely, quaint, historic old town, and the Shepherd University is a nice, small liberal arts school, so it's a nice place to be.
Absolutely. I enjoyed my visit. And recently, you dropped another little bomb, and I'm sure there's other things that you haven't even told me that you do about. Of course, we've known each other for years. You've been on the show multiple times over the years, but I don't know how to phrase this, so jump in and correct me here, but you've been the co-author on congressional investigations. Help me out here.
Yeah, a New York publisher came to us several years ago and asked us to update a study that was done by the famous historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr., And he did that. He and another author did a 5-volume study of congressional investigations. When Watergate happened in the 1970s, everybody suddenly focused on congressional investigations. They had on a few other occasions, but Watergate was the big one. And so they did this study looking back at all the other investigations. We were asked to bring that up to date. And of course, there were a lot of things about Watergate that weren't known. So we had a whole new section on that. And we brought it up to fairly recent times. Obviously, we're looking at another volume maybe that includes some of the more recent investigations, including all this incredible material that's now going on with the January 6th commission, which I'm following very closely.
Yeah. So would it be fair to say that you are in a collection of couple of dozen of people that know more about at least the history of congressional investigations in the entire world?
Well, I wouldn't say the whole world. I mean, there's a lot of bright people out there. But yes, we studied the details, the documents of all the major investigations, going all the way back to the very first one in 1793. We stopped in 2011 with Hurricane Katrina investigation, and there's been a number of important ones since then that could make another volume. They don't do volumes anymore, this publishing company, reference a company out of New York called Facts on File. It'll all be done just directly online now. So I'm sure they're thinking about what they're going to do with all the Trump material.
Oh, my goodness. And, of course, we already hinted at, in case, dear listener, you aren't the best at sarcasm or irony or whatever, we both think, and I think it's safe to say, and you can correct me if I have your position wrong, that Trump is one of, if not the clear leading candidate for the worst president ever. Would that be fair to say?
Well, the title to the last book I did on Trump, which is available on Amazon, Bearing Witness to America's Worst President, Essays on the Trump Disaster. So if that, I didn't want to hide my opinion on the interior of the book. I thought I'd put it in the title.
You did not bury the lead, as they would say. It's perfectly clear. A few months ago, I was at a community event, sitting down, and it's right before dinner, and we're just everyone chatting around the table. And I was talking to some guy about his business, and we were talking about my business. And then at some point, he said something along the lines of, "Well, it sounds like you know a lot about how business works and how money works. You must be a big Trump fan." and something in my brain broke. And if it wasn't for just a coincidence or someone else at the table that knew me, immediately, just at that moment, I'd like to give them credit for it. They saw, or they could tell where this was about to go, and they jumped in and changed the conversation and brought up another subject to the person that I was talking to. And it was someone that knew the other person as well. And that gave me 5 or 6 seconds to collect myself, because I think I was about to be completely inappropriate behavior in a social public setting. But I just don't know. I recently talked to someone who's been a longtime friend, and they're like, "Well, I look at both sides." Like, you mean the truth and the lies? Talk to me about January 6th, or whatever you wanted to follow up with that comment.
Well, I'll just follow up with what your observation about so many people. When you ask them why they voted for Trump, they'll say, "Well, we needed a businessman to run the country. We've had all these politicians, and they don't like politicians, and they think they like businessmen." Well, if they're going to pick a businessman, pick someone who didn't run a crime syndicate.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how that works with a lot of voters. A couple of labels, and if you like the label, you fall for the label. You forget to look at the details. Nobody looked at the fact that one of Trump's businesses, Trump University, he just settled a $25 million fraud suit just weeks before he was elected president. That didn't seem to register. I mean, and I'm still trying to figure out how so many people in this country suspended all belief to fall for this guy. So I'm a work in progress on that myself, just trying to sort it out.
It's one of those things because every time something more horrific comes out, I think, well, he'll lose 1 or 2% of the voters or 3% of the voters, and he'll change, but he doesn't, and they don't. And it's not just Trump University, and of course, I think the settlement is a fraction of the money he scammed from people over a period of time. And it's the same thing with Trump vodka, Trump airplanes, Trump casino. Who bankrupts a casino? How bad do you have to be to bankrupt a type of business that basically prints money? And his biggest thing is that he understands bankruptcy, he understands loopholes, he understands the games and how to play and how to do things with other people's money, pocket that money, and then bankrupt the business, and he gets to keep the money. And he's doing that same thing on a new, bigger scale. At least he has been and continues to do so with a political committee, because unlimited resources can come in. And of course, the new thing that will go bankrupt soon enough is Truth social media. I don't know if you've looked at that at all, but
I haven't looked at it, but and it's his latest effort. But he's using that to raise money, as he always does. And the fact that we're getting reports that he's raised upwards of $250 million just on this idea that he he didn't lose the election.
Yeah.
The big lie is not just a political ploy or something to make him feel better about himself. It is a huge money machine. I don't know how many businesses, just by saying one thing, can get people to suddenly shake $250 million out of their pockets and send it to them.
Well, and it's the phrase I love on the internet is a grifter gonna grift. This is what he does. He finds ways, and he has, I mean, I don't know if he's a sociopath, doesn't care about anyone else or who gets hurt as long as he comes out ahead. He will say anything, he will do anything, he will hurt anybody, call out people, like people that were counting ballots. He just picks on a random couple of people, and now their lives are forever destroyed and ruined, and they had to move, and they have to go into hiding and change their names. Absolutely stunning. So what do you think of this January 6th stuff, and how's it going? How are they doing compared to historical things? What's unique about it? What's different about it? And is it going to fucking work?
I think it will. I think it is one of the most remarkable and unique kinds of congressional investigations. When I look back at so many of the others, and the fact that it's being run like almost like a jury trial, where the American people are the jury, and they're acting as prosecutors who are presenting their narrative, which I think is very important for them to get out, and then they're bringing in witnesses. And since the committee itself is composed largely of Democrats, and the Republicans have been criticizing that, except for the two Republicans on the panel who distinguished themselves so well.
Yes.
The whole concept is different, and it's designed largely to get a narrative to the American people about how utterly bad conditions were throughout Trump's administration, but especially in his attempt to overthrow the government. They're investigating a coup, and this has never happened in the United States. No president has ever tried to overthrow the government and stay in office after he lost an election. And we have prided ourselves on this basic concept, and the world looked to the United States. Whenever we have peaceful elections, there's no armies in the streets, there's no riots, people are disappointed, but the loser accepts the loss, and the new president is sworn in, And we do that in honor of the American voter. We do that because the American voter, collectively, all of us, have decided this is who we want for president. This time it didn't happen. And so that's what they're investigating.
You know what would have really been horrible? I mean, there were, five swing states that Trump lost. I think it was 5. And so from an electoral college standpoint, he wasn't even particularly close in electoral college votes. But what if it was only one state? What if he had more votes but less electoral college votes? Imagine the nightmare that would have become.
Yes, and what Trump's pushing the absolute limits of American elections has brought up is the fact that the system itself is in serious need of reform. The Electoral College is something that I defended for many, many years. It's part of the Constitution. The only thing you can say about the Electoral College and its importance is that it does give the concept of a republic a true meaning, that you have 50 separate states that are united, and they are united through some of these devices in the Constitution, especially the Electoral College, which gives small states equal representation in the Senate, and it provides a population balance in the House, and then the Electoral College is determined by the votes. The number of votes is by the number of House and Senate members. That's 436 House members and 100 senators. That's 536 votes. So there's something you could say about holding the republic together. But now that doesn't work. It's not holding the republic together. It's stifling democracy.
Yeah, and this new idea that was floated, almost pulled off, the idea that some elected officials that may have gotten their jobs through gerrymandering schemes and scams could rise to higher levels within a state, and then they can just arbitrarily on their own appoint themselves as the voice for that state, submit electoral college votes that don't represent the will of the people. Am I hearing that right as something they're trying to do?
Yes, and it's been tried before. I think some of these lawyers for Trump, John Eastman in particular, and a few others, they looked back at some of the places where our democracy was pretty shaky, and they went back to the election of 1876, which was a total fiasco. And in order to solve that one, Congress and the government, they invented a commission of House and Senate members and members of the Supreme Court, 15-member commission, and to decide, because there were conflicting ballots from several states in the South, Florida, Louisiana. There were a couple of crazy ballots going on up in Arizona, Oregon, but they fixed that easily. But it was contested ballots in Louisiana, Florida, and other places where there were multiple slates of electors, and they had to decide who won that election, and it was decided by one electoral vote. And the guy that got the popular vote didn't win. Tilden, you never heard of him as president of the United States, but you heard of Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican. So that was all a complicated thing to settle Reconstruction after the Civil War. The deal was to remove the federal troops that were protecting black voters in the South and turn the South back over to white power. So it was a real mess, and it was a total disaster, and we're still paying the price for that in the kind of racism and white supremacy movements that we're seeing that appeal to Donald Trump so much, and all these white supremacists have rallied around Trump, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, some of these people who wanted to be a paramilitary force to overthrow the government for Donald Trump. So if there's one election you want to go back and look at to see how bad things could get when there's contested electors, then you go back and look at the 1876 election.
Yeah, there's always that small group of people that want to take power, and of course the checks and balances are supposed to mitigate that. But I will say, as far as this January 6th committee, it is nice to see a presentation. It's very different than other investigations because they're investigating, they're coming to what I think is a greater truth, and then they're presenting the information in a entertaining, informative, organized fashion with one single narrative instead of a Democrat gets 5 minutes to question somebody and a Republican gets 5 minutes where they wax on about how wonderful Trump is. And so it's kind of pointless, where this is not pointless. This is a compelling, informative narrative, and we learn new things each time. Although part of me says, I saw what I saw with my own damn eyes, and people were at a Trump rally and then went and took over the House. What else do you need? I don't know. It seems so bloody simple that day, and every piece of information that comes out makes it worse and worse and worse. But yet, just a few days ago, I had a conservative Fox News watching friend told me all this time and effort is wasted. It's all still a witch hunt, and they don't have anything on Trump at all. I'm like, they don't have anything? Did you watch these presentations? I didn't have to because Fox walked me through it. And I was like, oh my God.
Well, Fox is walking him through the big lie. And
Yeah.
I do watch Fox from time to time because I want to see it myself.
Yeah.
And so I do pay attention to the propaganda that comes from that station. And it's gotten worse and worse as time goes by because they had to defend a man who was beyond defending. Somehow they've figured out how to do it, but I don't know how long it's going to last because the weight of evidence will come out. It's very important that we prosecute Trump, even if he gets off on some technicality or maybe on an insanity plea or whatever it might happen. If we don't say that this is serious enough for the Justice Department to deal with, or for Congress to investigate, if we say this is a witch hunt, we shouldn't be doing it, we're denying the rule of law, we're denying the will of the people, and we can't do that. So even if this turns out to be a mess, and some people say, well, if you go after Trump too hard, it's going to divide the country even further, and we could end up in a civil war. We cannot let that kind of language cause us to back off of what this country is founded on, and that is a rule of law and constitutional principles. We're walking away from all that if we try to minimize Trump.
I agree. So, and I have this inherent thing to me when someone says you should sit down and be quiet because you don't want to stir up any trouble. There's something wrong or different with me than a lot of people where I'm like, well, that's the moment I have to be the loudest, because if the only way to make peace and to go forward and not have conflict is to give up and surrender, well, then what's the point of it all? Because now I have already surrendered. That they don't have to do anything. They don't have to prove anything. And it seems, only a few people around Trump have gone to jail. Michael Cohen is one of them. And he's a guy that flipped on reality, and he gets a big punishment. Other people that continue the lie often haven't gotten big punishments, or they got pardons. Was it Flynn? Tom Flynn? General Flynn
got a pardon, and so did Roger Stone.
Yes.
And these guys are among the worst crooks in America who have been plotting the overthrow of the country for a long time, and finally found a vehicle in Donald Trump.
And Tom Flynn, under his congressional investigation, was asked if he believes in the peaceful transfer of power in the United States. And he said, I take the fifth.
Right.
Really? Of course, that's not surprising. But more of these people, dozens of these people, have to go to jail. I mean, even if we're never going to get Donald to go to jail, it should be seen as something that 20, 40, 50, 100 people end up going to jail, just like we now have, I think, 300 or 400 people have gotten sentenced to jail for storming not the Capitol, the House. And maybe that gives another group in the future pause to say, well, last time people did that, a lot of them went to jail.
Well, in Watergate, more than 40 people went to jail, including the Attorney General, and I think before this is over, we may see numbers similar to that for people who were handlers and enablers of this conspiracy. And what you said earlier, Phil, about we saw all this happen in broad daylight, and we did, and we saw him do things that were so illegal that he was impeached twice.
Yeah.
For things that he did in public, and the second time he was impeached, it was for inciting an insurrection, for insurrectionist activities, when he ordered the mob to come to the Capitol. So he's already been impeached for that. Now, he was not found guilty in the Senate. So Trump sees that as exoneration.
Yeah.
And of course, he immediately, Fox News immediately says he was exonerated. He was not guilty of that. In law, you either are innocent or guilty, but exoneration does not come from being from a non-guilty
right.
plea.
I wouldn't even.
He's not been exonerated in the eyes of most Americans.
Yeah, I wouldn't say guilty or innocent. I would say guilty or not guilty, because not guilty, as you said, doesn't mean you're innocent, doesn't mean you're exonerated. It just means whatever the standard of evidence was deemed non-sufficient by the people that voted. But then, of course, you have politics involved in this. And I think there were only a few people that stood their ground. I mean, when Mike Pence becomes a hero, how bizarre is that? I mean, if he had said that this isn't legitimate and sent it back to the states for further consideration, all hell would have broke loose.
Yes. And of course, I think Mike Pence got good advice about the fact that he didn't have a role. There was no role. There's no constitutional role. I've been on the floor of the House when these electoral ballots have been counted. It's a sleepy little affair.
Usually.
It's a very ceremonial affair, and a lot of members don't even show up. There's people scattered in the galleries. It's over in about 40 minutes, 45 minutes. And occasionally there's a conflicted ballot. Of course, last time we saw that was in 2000 with the hanging chads in Florida.
Jesus, yeah.
And Al Gore losing that vote, and that election sent to the Supreme Court where it should never have gone.
Agreed.
But so we've had these problems. But the idea that you would use the electoral count, which is a ceremonial count of what the states have already certified. The election is over.
Yeah.
And then you go through these steps, these ceremonial steps, because part of the exchange of power is a ceremony. You have the election, you get the results, you have the certification ceremony, and then you have 2 weeks later the inauguration. It is a process that helps the people accept the change and gets everybody on the same page that we have a new government. And so I think Pence understood that he had no role to play. What little role he did have to play, he ended up playing, which is basically to pass the ballots down to the tellers. There's House and Senate tellers, and then say that this looks like it's a legitimate thing, and you pass it down. It's very routine, but very symbolic. Nice little constitutional ceremony, but of no real consequence in determining the election, unless there's true contested ballots, which they have to do. And there were no contested ballots.
Right.
None of the states sent contested ballots. And then afterwards, they tried to make up contested ballots and have phony electors submit things after the fact.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I say, Republicans are always looking for election and voter fraud. Well, we found it.
The voter fraud came in the fake electors.
Yeah. And it's amazing the integrity of a few random people in Georgia, in Arizona, and there was even, I can't remember the guy's name. He came and testified and talked about all the terrible things Trump and his people were trying to do to overthrow the will of the people in the state of Arizona. I may have the wrong state, but I think it's Arizona. And then later he was asked if Trump ran again, would he vote for him? And he wouldn't exclude that possibility. And I'm thinking, well, you just testified that this guy is a con man and a criminal and maybe a traitor. But yet, if he ran again, you'd vote for him. That's messed up.
I can't figure that one out at all. Some of the witnesses at the January 6th committee have said, in effect, that what they saw Trump doing was wrong, and that they violated the Constitution, and they had to stand up for the Constitution and for the laws of their own state, and they did. And as you say, Phil, then they turned around and said, "Well, I might vote for this guy again."
Yeah,
that is something that's totally mysterious to me.
Because I think it's one of those things that they're like, okay, finally there's this line that was crossed. And a lot of these people that are testifying, because they're under oath and they're in front of Congress and they're testifying, and it's great to hear them testifying. But I look at a lot of them and I'm like, okay, so we had the young lady who was the assistant to Trump's chief of staff. Okay, I get it. She didn't say anything in real time because she's pretty much over her head. It was over her head and out of her depth. But she's stepping up now when there's an opportunity. But somebody like Bill Barr, who gets interviewed and said, "Oh, all this stuff that Trump was trying to do was bullshit, and we investigated that, and we kept telling him over and over and over that there's nothing there." That's all great for him to say once he's pinched and he's under investigation. But why did he not in real time go out and do a presentation and say, "We've looked at all this stuff. There's nothing there"? He didn't do any of that. Why is that?
This business with this most powerful witness that came forward so far, this young woman, Cassidy Hutchinson, I think someone who's worked in government and you want to support your boss. You're there to do all the things you're supposed to do. You're not there to question the president. You're not there to question the chief of staff. You're not there to question the president's attorney, Pat Cipollone. You're there to be someone who facilitates what they need to have done, and you're right there in the center of it.
Yeah.
But she got to the point, and she testified beautifully to this, where she saw that the people who were supposed to be the adults in the room, the chief of staff, Mark Meadows, Pat Cipollone, some of these other characters who were really the functionaries in the White House, were not doing their job. And here's Mark Meadows sitting in the corner playing with his cell phone,
yeah,
and saying the president doesn't want to be disturbed while the United States Capitol is under assault with people with weapons and people getting killed in the process. And this 24-year-old staff person sees that with clarity. Now, why didn't she step forward earlier? Again, you think in terms of chain of command. You're not there to override the president of the United States. You're a 24-year-old staffer.
Yeah.
And then when she got a lawyer, the lawyers that were given to all these people who were in jeopardy were lawyers that were being paid for by Trump.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't blame her for not doing something in real time. Like I said, and I agree with your analysis. And it wasn't her place to do that. But Mark Meadows, I sure as fuck blame him. The picture that she painted of him just with his phone, it sounds like he is having some kind of mental collapse because he knows what is going on is wrong and immoral and unethical and illegal in every way, but he can't figure out how he can stand up and not be ruined himself. So he's made a calculus that he has to go along to get along to keep his job and his position and his power, but every part of him knows that it's wrong, and he just like tilts. It's like he becomes catatonic almost, where he's like, I don't know, I can't. I'm going to think harder. What can I do? I don't know what to do. And so I can almost see him like playing Tetris on his phone, because your brain can comprehend that the situation in reality is so bizarre that you can't process it. Well, okay, if you can't process that shit, you shouldn't be there. And if you are there, then you should stand up and say something. Why didn't any of these people go out and have? I mean, like I said, Bill Barr, I think, is the absolute worst. He could have had a press conference at the snap of his fingers, and 5 minutes later there'd be 100 reporters and cameras at his beck and call, and all he had to do is come out and say, Donald Trump has given us 20 things to investigate. We looked at them all. There's no there. And boom. Wow, how awesome would it have been? But instead, no, he can have his cake and eat it too, because he can say Trump went too far. That's why I quit. But even in his resignation letter, he praised how awesome Trump was. Come on, really? All of it.
When Trump became president of the United States, some of us, a lot of us in this country, saw this as not just an election that was lost, but that he would put his inability to lead and his total role as a demagogue and not as a leader of the country. He led a party that was willing to follow him. He was not the president of the whole country. He became the president of a party who constantly campaigned. And when he was in the White House, he wasn't doing anything but watching television and tweeting. People were covering up from him for forever.
Yeah.
And they talked about using the 25th Amendment on him shortly after he was elected, that he was not fit mentally to be the president. And they talked about using the 25th Amendment toward the end when they, what way can you stop a president that's not capable of being president anymore? Well, the 25th Amendment is a pretty hard thing to make it work. Because you need 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate, and you need the cabinet members themselves, people like Mark Meadows, to sign a document saying that the president isn't fit. Then you can use the 25th Amendment. They couldn't use it, even though it kept coming up. And some of the same people that were on there say, well, he's so crazy, we got to get him out of there using the Constitution. I think some of that will come out, but it'll be years before we get the full story on how bad it was. But the commission, I keep calling it the commission, the 9/11 committee.
The January 6th committee.
Now I called it the 9/11 committee. You got me going.
Yeah.
The January 6th committee is their job now is not to be able to tell everything that we should know, but to create such a strong narrative. And then their report, which is due out in September, that should be something that every American reads, and I think it will be written in a way that every American will read. It will be compelling, and that will also then, by then, I'm sure we will have heard from the Justice Department. They're investigating him now. They're just doing it very quietly, while the January 6th committee is getting all the public attention.
I hope you're right on that part, because I know I've been optimistic that the New York Justice Department, the state of New York, was investigating him and his people and would do something, and then all of a sudden one day they just end the investigation, and you're like, what? You can't find any crime ever? I don't know.
The investigations are important, even if they don't amount to anything, because they create a body of evidence that could. These things roll along. This is a big machine that's rolling, and it has many parts. And the Georgia election fraud, where President Trump just asked the Secretary of State down there to find him an exact number of votes that would give him one more vote to win.
Yeah.
If that isn't tampering with an election, I don't know what is. And of course, the New York stuff, and where they're investigating his family. There's other state and federal things that are all going on simultaneously, and it shouldn't be easy to bring any president down, but they shouldn't be beyond being brought down.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to do a quick subject change, see if you want to talk about it for a few minutes before we wrap up. Supreme Court. Anything you want to say about that?
Yes, I've been following the Supreme Court for many, many years. I've got to know many of the justices, not so many of the recent ones, but when I was House historian, I was the chief House officer for the bicentennial of the U.S. Constitution, and that put me in direct contact with Chief Justice Warren Burger, and I'd have lunches with him at the Supreme Court. We'd have receptions there, and I got to meet almost all the justices, but that court is gone now, and the three justices that Trump was able to put in put him over the top in terms of a court that is totally ideological. They are and they were elected to overturn Roe v. Wade. They weren't elected; they were appointed to that job by a party that has had for a long time the idea that they would abolish abortion in the United States, and now they did it. They did it, within months of the last appointee, and it is a court that is going to set us back big time, and it's already doing it. It's doing it based on what they think is a narrow view of the Constitution that the Founding Fathers dreamed up. And that whole process, if you think about it, says that people today living in the 21st century are not as smart as those who were living in the 17th century.
Yeah, they're bound by. I can't remember what book I had recently read, but it was talking about, kings. Maybe someone becomes king. You could see it as legitimate because they had the savvy and the power and the control and all the things necessary to become king. But when their son or grandson becomes king, what did they do? They got born in the right place, And this idea that there's never anyone better than the king's grandson to take over is flawed. It's probably wrong. It's almost guaranteed to be wrong that that's the best person to run the country. And this idea that people who were willing to say that African Americans or slaves were 3/5 of a person. We know better than that. To say that women don't have the mental capacity or the ability to understand what it means to vote. I'd like to think we're better than that. The idea that different groups of people can't have money, or that different races can't marry, or that everyone should be allowed to vote. Aren't we better than that now? I mean, because if we're using this foundational document as the only thing, the immutable first drafting document that we have to stick to, if we use that logic, which I think was part of the logic used in reversing Roe versus Wade, that it wasn't a tradition, it wasn't a historical norm of the United States. Well, a historical norm of the United States was that there was no interracial marriage, that women could not vote, that African Americans could not vote. That was all true for a longer period of time than those rights have been in place. Am I right here? Help me out. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, you're absolutely right, and I'm a great fan of the United States Constitution. There's parts of it that need to be like the Electoral College we mentioned earlier, that needs to have another heavy look. But we can't be slaves to something that was written by slave owners.
Yeah.
We honor the parts of it that work. It is our Constitution, our fundamental document. The principles of the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal and certain unalienable rights, that is a principle that we've never totally lived up to, but it's a fantastic principle.
Yeah.
So I'm not ready to throw out those founding documents at all. I'm not about to criticize the founding fathers for not understanding 21st century America and the republic that has grown exponentially since they were around. But for a court to go back and be that literal and say abortion's not mentioned in the Constitution, what a silly argument! It's an insult to people in this country for him to use that basic document in that way. And of course they're using it for religious. They're taking us back to a theocracy almost. the idea that the Christian nationalist groups, the family, and some of these other crazy groups that have said it was prophecy that when Trump would be elected president, he would put 5 justices on the Supreme Court. Well, had he been elected a second term, maybe that prophecy would have been fulfilled. But the idea that they saw this in biblical terms and in religious prophecy,
right,
that the court itself had to change so that we could take America to another place we want to go. This court's doing it.
Yeah.
There's no other way to describe it right now.
Well,
I think we should here. I'll just say this, Phil.
Yeah.
The simple thing. It's not simple. First of all, you got to get enough people in the House and Senate. You can change the Supreme Court by law. It does not take a constitutional amendment.
Correct.
It just takes a law that says there will be 13 people. Right now, there's 13 circuits.
Yeah, one per circuit. I've heard that argument.
And these guys run circuits. So let's get 13 members on the Supreme Court, and that would add diversity, and it would add more numbers, and it would be less of a small cabal that can use Federalist Society principles to take us back to the 17th and 18th century.
Absolutely. I want to be respectful for your time, but of course we could probably talk all day. I just want to throw the ball to you for a moment here. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you think you want to cover, you want to mention? This is your opportunity. Free question. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I think we've talked about the things that I've been thinking about, and that I think the country ought to be thinking about, and so I don't want to take it into another place. Maybe we'll do that on another broadcast sometime if you want to have me back sometime, which I'd be delighted to do.
I appreciate it. Everybody, once again, Ray Smock. He has multiple books available. You can go on Amazon. He's got 3 contemporaneous, relatively, books on Trump, and a lot of the content was written in real time and then put together later. So I'm assuming, because what I know of you, it becomes a historical document as a real-time narrative of what's happening this day and this day and this day, all put together and organized in different books. So I think that's probably the best way they can find out more about you, unless I'm thinking of some other way. Do you want people to contact you, email you? Do you want to do talks? Where's your head at with this?
Well, I'm in the business mainly at the Byrd Center. We do civics education, and we do historical research, and we have a program to educate civics teachers mostly in the surrounding area, Maryland, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and that's important that we continue that. I'm going to continue that as long as I have breath in my body. So I'm perfectly happy to hear from anybody that has questions, and if somebody wants to email me, it's my name, and I'll tell you, this will show you how old I am. My email address is raysmock@aol.com, and AOL is back. I think the founding fathers used that one.
Yeah, I think they did. Well, Ray, thank you so much for spending your precious time with us and our listeners. And like I said, you're the number one requested guest to come back. So thank you for taking this time. And I appreciate you coming and being on the Phil Ferguson Show.
Always a pleasure, Phil. Thank you very much.
Pace e lunga vita.
Lunga vita e prosperità.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
Just got a quick wrap up for you here on this show. It's just 4:24. Thank you for listening. If you like the show, go give a 5-star review somewhere. Share with your friends. Anything that you can do to help me out in that way, I would greatly appreciate it. I think I finally decided. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. The next roughly 6 episodes might be a little shorter. Instead of the hour plus, they might be 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes. I don't know. But I'm going to redo the shows that I did 2 years ago about the Polaris Plan. So it is very, very widely requested that I do this again, and I'm honored for anyone that's interested and curious and wants to hear an update to this. And I've been teasing it for months, but I think I'm now at the point where I'm ready to do that. And to make it a little easier on me, I probably won't have an interview or another topic, although I reserve the right to do whatever the fuck I want. But the next 6 episodes, unless I make it 5 or 7, but approximately 6. Focus, Phil, focus. The next 6 episodes are going to be about the Polaris plan. Why you should use it, or why you should consider using it. Do whatever you want. Why does it work? How does it work? And all those questions from a very introductory level, very broad scale. And then we will dig into some of the minutia and get into details of the individual funds that you could choose to use. Keeping in mind, all of that and all of this show is for entertainment and possibly educational purposes. None of this is to be considered personalized investment advice. Check with your own tax professional, your own attorney, your own investment advisor before taking any action. But you're on your own, right? I'm just some dumbass here saying shit on the radio. Podcast, not really a radio. But if it gives you some ideas, a starting point, something to do, something to help you along the way, that's great. I'd be honored to be considered helpful in some small way in your attempts, your goal to build an everlasting nest egg, one that you can take out 4 or 5 or 6% per year and can do that continuously for the rest of your life. And the goal is to get yourself in the position where I would define it as rich, and specifically that you no longer have to work for the purpose of earning money. You can still work, you can still make money, but you don't have to. If you find work enjoyable, if you find doing something that you love enjoyable and it happens to pay you, that's great for you. But you don't have to do anything when you're rich. And so to be rich, you have to have a portfolio of a sufficient size that through the dividends and small sales of things that have appreciated in value, you can do that for the rest of your life in perpetuity. The everlasting nest egg idea is what I'm going for. And that's a wonderful place to be. And hopefully some of you can get there. And hopefully I can help you in some small way get to that. So once again, thanks for listening. Like I said, the next 6 shows might come quicker, but they might be shorter. So I hope you enjoy. If I make anything more confusing than helping to explain, send me a nice email. Don't be a dick about it. Don't be a jerk. Just send me a nice email and say, Phil, you confused me. And I can try to clarify maybe in the next segment. But I'm going to wrap up for today. Whew, so many words. I appreciate you listening, and I hope to see you out there at a conference or somewhere in person soon. Until then, ciao.